Is Homelander actually unstoppable? Or has the boys been quietly setting up the one person who can end him from the very beginning? Because when you strip everything down, every failed plan, every confrontation, every moment where it feels like nothing in this world can touch him, you start to notice a pattern, and it leads to a much deeper, more unsettling idea that doesn't rely on bigger explosions or stronger enemies, but on something far more personal. That idea points directly to Ryan Butcher, not just as a character, but as a concept, as the one variable Homelander can't fully predict, control, or overpower in the way he does everything else. Once you start looking at it that way, the entire story begins to shift, because this isn't about finding something stronger than Homelander, it's about understanding the one thing he was never designed to handle. Homelander exists as the ultimate result of control and manipulation, a being engineered from the start to be powerful, to be perfect, to be a product, even if that control eventually broke down and turned him into something unstable. But at his core, he is still the outcome of a system that tried to shape him into something specific, and that foundation matters more than it seems, because it means his power, as overwhelming as it is, still comes from something artificial, something constructed, something that has limits built into it, whether we fully understand them or not. Ryan, on the other hand, represents something entirely different. He isn't engineered, he isn't manufactured, he wasn't designed in a lab to meet expectations, he was born. And that single difference changes everything, because in almost every version of this kind of story, the natural evolution of something surpasses the artificial version. Not instantly, but inevitably. We've already seen small glimpses of that potential, especially in moments where Ryan's emotions take over, like when he killed Stormfront. What made that moment so important wasn't just the act itself, but how it happened. It wasn't controlled or precise. It was overwhelming, the kind of power that feels unfiltered and limitless. And that suggests something crucial. Ryan's abilities might not be bound by the same constraints as Homelander's. And if that's true, then the question isn't whether he can match him. It's how long it takes before he surpasses him completely. But even that idea doesn't fully explain why Ryan is the key, because if this were only about power, then the story would still be predictable. It would just be a matter of time before a stronger character takes down the current one. And The Boys has never really been that kind of story. It's always been more focused on what power does to people, how it isolates them, how it warps their sense of reality, and how it creates vulnerabilities that have nothing to do with strength. That's where Homelander's real weakness begins to show, not in his body, but in his need for connection. His need to be seen, understood, and accepted is something he has spent his entire life chasing without ever truly finding it. Every relationship he's had has been incomplete or artificial in some way, whether it was his dependence on Madeline Stillwell or his obsession with public approval. None of it has given him something real and stable until Ryan. And that's what makes Ryan different from every other character in the story, because he isn't just another person in Homelander's world. He's the only person who exists outside of that dynamic of control. The only person who can stand next to him without being beneath him or against him. That creates a kind of vulnerability that Homelander has never had to deal with before. Ryan is the one person who can get close without resistance, who can exist in his space without triggering his instincts. And that access alone makes him more dangerous than any weapon or enemy, because it creates the possibility of a moment where Homelander is completely exposed, not because he's weak, but because he chooses to be. At the same time, the story keeps placing Ryan in situations where he has to define who he is and decide what kind of person he wants to become. And that's where the theory expands into something much bigger, because Ryan isn't just a solution to the Homelander problem, he's also a potential escalation of it, depending on the path he chooses. On one side, there's the possibility that Ryan grows into someone who understands the consequences of power, who sees what Homelander has become, and chooses to reject it. In that scenario, he becomes the only person capable of stopping him, not just physically, but emotionally, because he's the only one who can truly break through to him. But on the other side, there's a much darker possibility, one that the show has been hinting at just as strongly. Ryan might not reject Homelander at all. He might embrace him, learn from him, adopt his worldview in a way that is even more refined and dangerous. Because, unlike Homelander, Ryan isn't starting from isolation and confusion. He's starting with guidance, with influence, with a model to follow. And that could create something far worse than what already exists. A version of Homelander that doesn't have the same emotional instability, that doesn't make the same mistakes, that grows into power with a clearer sense of purpose, even if that purpose is destructive. And that's what makes this theory feel so inevitable, because it reframes the entire story. It shifts the focus away from the idea of defeating Homelander through force and toward the idea that the real conflict has always been about what comes after him. Ryan is the center of that decision. He isn't just the only one who can stop Homelander. He's the only one who can replace him. And those two outcomes are much closer than they seem because they both depend on the same thing, the same moment, the same choice. And when that moment finally comes, it won't be about who is stronger or faster or more powerful. It will be about who Ryan decides to be and whether that decision ends Homelander's story or ensures that it never really ends at all.